Welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud,
I'm Art Gelwicks.
and today we're going to be talking about cloud storage.
Yeah, this is an exciting topic, trust me.
I don't know if it's an excited topic or we're going to get people, but sleeping in the middle of this. But the reality is, this cloud storage was the beginning of cross-platform. If we go back, when many years back, okay, you had that issue of sharing a file because you still have issues on how big those files could be emailed and when can you email and what can you email, what is the last version. Okay, so let me remind you, you begin with a floppy. Okay, then you went to a pen drive. And I remember when I began selling the technology early in my career, you have those pen drives that were megabytes. Okay.
hmm
And now those things are gigabytes, 128 gigabytes, 256 gigabytes, and they got less than what my 256 megabytes used to cost. Let me say.
Yeah, the one I have on my keychain right here is 256
Gig as a flash
Yes.
drive.
Yeah, and it's a flash drive.
So, which is more storage than is on my laptop.
Yeah.
But it's still a physical device. And that's when we
Correct.
think about cross-platform, you're right. This was one of the first cross-platform things because you could load files, from one laptop to another through the physical devices. And I'm not thinking about storage medium. I mean, bringing up floppy drives and zip drives and things like that are completely valid. They also demonstrate how old we actually are. But
Well, I read stories, history books. That's how I learned about the floppy.
all right, yeah, I'll mail you an 8-inch floppy at some point. So we'll go from there. But the entire thing, as we move away from the physical part of it over to the cloud storage part, once internet connectivity became basically ubiquitous or much more prevalent. I don't know if I want to say ubiquitous because that's a whole different conversation, but that it's much more prevalent. The ability to move files directly through this third party point of contact became critical. So if you could move the files, you're right, sending them by email was the way to go, but you hit caps on the size of the files and things like that. So somebody started to come up with the idea, well, why can't we stick it in the middle? Why can't we store it to a server and then pull it back down? And they were doing that for, if you go back to, FTP servers and things like that. And again, for those of you under 50, go Google it. You'll find it. But that type of thing, from a cloud storage standpoint, meant that your content could be accessible to you wherever you had connectivity, which I think is one of the biggest pluses and minuses. I mean, when we start to talk about pros and cons of this, it's connectivity dependent if you're not working with multiple copies of your files. So,
And
go ahead.
there is another element because right now when we talk about cross-platform, we think PC, we think Mac, we think iCloud, Android, the phone. Wait, the first cross-platform was more simple than that. Was my home PC because it used to be a desktop, and my work PC that used to be another desktop. We think laptops are there and we are used to them, but laptops were not available for everybody
hmm
that long ago, really. So this was really the first thing that this allows you to, hey, I can put the file in here and then go home or and download the file and continue working and bring my file back. So this is really this is what made it. I mean, the topic may not be the most fun topic, but it's exactly what make this is what allows to think about cross-platform. Didn't matter really what machine you have on the other side if you could stick it in there. And not only that, as a person who worked and continue working with many countries and nationalities and clients and all over, now it was an issue of great. I'm going to travel to Mexico to this conference and I can stick this PowerPoint in there. And if worst comes to worst, I will be able to retrieve it.
And I think that's where we really start to get into the meat of this conversation around cloud storage, because when we're dealing with our materials and we're saying, okay, I want this accessible, accessible only becomes part of the equation. And you've heard, anybody who's listened to the show has heard me mention about what I consider the big three, task lists, note taking, and calendars. Well, there's actually a big four. And the fourth is cloud storage. Because if you think about the materials you have, whether it's scanned documents, which really push this, I think, more into its forefront. I mean, you can create all the Word documents or Google Docs that you want, but it's scanned assets that you don't need to retain physical copies that really push this into a different conversation. But we get into this point of this becomes a linchpin part of our productivity platform, regardless of the devices we have or the devices we're moving to. If we think about, for example, let's take those scanned documents. Well, what's the point of putting those in cloud storage? Well, it should be the same as anything else that we have in cloud storage. We need to be able to organize it, we need to be able to access it, and we need it backed up. So with cloud storage, that has value. There's a price to be able to provide that capability. And with the size of files and the size of content increasing, I mean, we talked about the floppy disks earlier, and 128 meg flash drives and things like that. You can't get a video file on those anymore. You can't get larger documents, even smaller documents in many cases. So as the size of the assets increases, the space is needed. You can't necessarily provide that locally. So where do you provide it? You provide it from the cloud.
Well,
and that's
you could technically put it locally. Yeah, you can get a larger pen drive, but now we go into other things, times, distance, think about pandemic, remote. Okay, how I'm going to give you my pen drive so you can connect it to your machine. So the reality is that the cloud storage is incredibly convenient. And it is incredible on the productivity perspective what it brought. Now, you can do so many things. And if you go with a serious provider, you are assured of security and backups and other things, that it's now a weight that you can take away. On the ones we are going to cover, we can think on Dropbox, okay, as a backup. You can delete a file from Dropbox and save it. You have a time frame in which they will actually delete it. But if you delete one by mistake, you will be able to come back and save it. That is priceless.
Yeah, there's certain factors that I personally consider the kind of the price of admission when it comes to a cloud storage service. Backing up the data is one of them. I mean, being able to recall and to synchronize data from multiple locations. So, for example, file storage. Do you have to manually go to a web page every time and upload a file or download a file? Is there a backup? Is there a process that'll run on your computer that will constantly monitor a local folder and any changes that happen there, push it up to the cloud drive, and then pull it back down? These are all convenience factors that really start to provide a greater reason to using it. I want to get into, before we get too far down this path and into the different services, I do want to take a little time to get security on the table and off it. Security is probably one of the biggest conversation topics around cloud storage, whether it's personal security, whether it's corporate security. When you hear a company that has been using localized storage for years and they talk about moving to the cloud, one of the first things that'll come up in the conversation is, well, how do we protect our stuff? Now, I'm not a security expert, so be nice, people, but that's what these companies get paid for. You look at companies like Microsoft with OneDrive. You look at companies like Google with Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, all the others, the major ones at least. If they do not provide a secure environment, they do not have a product to offer.
Correct.
And it doesn't take much to destroy the reputation of one of these services. So, from a security standpoint, I would challenge anybody who's concerned about moving content to the cloud. Two things. One, your biggest weakness in your security is not going to be your cloud provider if you do your due diligence. It's going to be your users.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be the first challenge. And if it's just yours, you're probably the biggest weakness. Using the same password over and over again, using weak passwords, not locking out applications that don't need access to cloud storage, any number of security checks that you need to have in place and you need to do. Failing to do those breach the security. The second part, though, is do the benefits outweigh the potential risks? I've had this discussion numerous times where people will say, "Oh, I'll never put any of my financial information inside of a cloud storage drive." That's completely your choice. That's totally fine. If you want to keep all that on your local machine, do that. Feel free.
And it's interesting because people don't understand the difference in the security measurements that a serious company will take versus what they will take. Most people I know in the best of the best have a backup.
Right.
That's it. These companies has a backup of the backup of the backup, and in some cases multiple simultaneous backups. They are taking they have people which job is check for that security, that there is no leaks. Really? When
Mm-hmm.
is the last time you checked your own personal machine? Sorry, unless you're a security expert, the answer is never. So there are a lot of good advantages going to serious companies. Do Can you go anywhere? You can. I will not recommend it. Are there solutions what will allow me to do my own cloud? Yes, they are. I will not recommend it. Why? Because unless you really understand security, you are putting yourself in a disadvantage when you go that instead of go and hire an actual company.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. It, I kind of equate it to when you're setting up a website. You can go through and you can learn how to do your own web hosting and you can learn how to do your own domain name management. You can learn how to do all those things and you can do all of them on your own if you put the time and effort in. The question is, are you going to get everything? Do you want that level of responsibility? Or are you willing to pay something to have somebody else take that level of responsibility from you? I'm not saying that one is better than the other. What
Correct.
I'm, what I'm saying is it's a consideration, especially when we consider cross-platform solutions. If it's something that I'm going to do a kind of roll your own type of option, I have to be the one responsible to make sure it's available on all the different platforms that I'm going to use. If you look at the large players that we're going to talk about here, they all have that already considered because they have a substantial enough user base that providing access on iPads, on Android tablets, on phones, on laptops, on desktops is part of their customer base demand. Therefore, they have to provide that functionality. But to go back to the security point one bit, there is a piece within security that some of the vendors are starting to provide. I actually only know of one off the top of my head, but there may be others where they're providing security within security in their systems. And the example I'll use is Microsoft OneDrive. Microsoft OneDrive has a feature now within OneDrive called a personal vault. And the personal vault is a secured folder section within your OneDrive environment that has a separate password access from your main one. It automatically locks itself when you leave it. It automatically secures the content. The content is encrypted. I don't know how good the encryption is. I'm sure somebody will tell me. But the fact is, it is another layer that is protected in there. If security is a concern, this is something to look for. It's
Mhm.
something I personally take advantage of because when it comes down to it, the combination of a reasonably secure, reasonably available, and reasonably convenient solution provides me value. And then I can say, okay, whatever this thing is I'm looking at, I can use it across all the different tools that I need to use it.
Right.
So let's start talking through some of them, and we put together a short list, but I'm going to kind of work backwards through the short list. So let's start
Perfect.
let's start with iCloud. Now, I'll admit, I know nothing about iCloud. I haven't used iCloud in years, but I'm assuming it has the same basic structures as other cloud-based storage services.
iCloud is what Apple professes where synchronized many of the iOS, iPadOS, and macOS things synchronized. You're required to have an iCloud. They give you, I don't know, 5 gigs for free. I think they synchronize the photos. There is not a great backup there. And that for me is Achilles heel. Okay. I personally use Dropbox, that we're going to cover later.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that whatever file goes in that online cloud, I don't need to think if that thing, what happened if I delete it by mistake? Sorry, my family has access to the iCloud. Okay. If they delete my things, I don't want to think, oh, I did lose that, and now how I'm going to recover it. Or
Mm-hmm.
even, can they delete it? I don't even want to think they have access to delete it. So for that reason, I have iCloud, but it's not where my files live. It's where my contacts live, the calendar synchronize, and all that, but not where my main files live.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't worked with iCloud in years. How accessible is iCloud content from non-Apple devices?
You can go iCloud.com and you can access everything. Even
Okay.
now, in modern days, that was not the reality always, but you can even open pages documents on the web if you have your login and your password and everything. So it has improved significantly. Will I trust to put all my things there? No.
And that's a big statement to make. I mean, when you think about a platform like the Apple platform and their ecosystem, the fact that iCloud isn't de facto the de facto standard for all Apple devices to store there, and it has a hesitation of using it because it lacks functionality, it really seems to be a miss, at least in my mind, on their part for this.
It is, and they have tried to improve it, and it has improved gradually every year. But it's not, again, to this day, I cancel my account on Dropbox and move to iCloud? I will not.
Okay. All right. Next one up, Box. Now, I used Box quite a while ago. I still have a Box account. Matter of fact, aside from iCloud, and I might even have an iCloud account, I've got an account on all these different services. Box, I don't use. I haven't used it in a couple of years. It's a nice application, and it has those basic sets of services. But as I recall, Box has been trying to make more of a play into the business space the same way that Dropbox has. So, from a standpoint of availability and storage, just looking right off of their webpage here, they have free storage of up to 10 gigabytes. But then you have a 250 meg file upload limit. So those are things that you have to look at. I mean, as individuals, they only have two choices. It's either free or it's $10 a month with up to 100 gig of storage. And it's those caps that I start to draw into question on some of these. When we talk about something like Box and having 100 gig of storage cap. Now, 100 gig is a lot of storage. But remember at the top of the show, I also said my little flash drive here is 256 gig.
Correct.
So it's not that much storage, and you're paying $10 a month. And the thing to take into consideration, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Augusto, is once you're in a cloud storage provider, you get stuck in a hurry.
Mhm.
The more stuff you put in there, the harder it is to get out.
Correct.
So when you look at a solution like a box, like a Dropbox, something like that, where they've got that cap on there, yeah, you're not going to overfill it, but you're still going to get to a point where it's like, I've got so much stuff in here, I'm not going to move to something else unless there's something compelling about another service. And when we talk about the big two later on, uh, I'll explain why I think they are basically a duplicate of each other. But do you use Box?
I don't use Box currently. I had a couple of clients who were Box users, so I have access to, so we exchange files, but I have never had my own Box and storage my files in Box. No, I went, and it's exactly what you said. I begin on Dropbox. Why? I don't remember. I think because Dropbox was at the beginning, they give you, I think it was 2 gigabytes, but if you invite somebody, they give you something else or whatever they give you. And I eventually had such a massive account that was never good. And it's that. All the stuff is in there. Okay. How big it is, I don't know. But the idea of moving that anywhere, you know, it's
Yeah,
not something.
I think what catalyzed me, and this is something that often you'll see. Matter of fact, I just I just opened my Box account for the first time in ages. Just logged into it while we're here on the show, and I've got files back. I've got files in here from like 2006. Um, what catalyzed me to get a Box account was there was an application, and I honestly don't remember which one, but there was an application that provided synchronization of the app and its content through Box. And that's one of the things that we'll see commonly. If you're looking at cloud storage, often applications will utilize a cloud storage provider as their method of sync between copies of their application, whether it's between different machines, whether different instances of it. It's their way of getting around the locked in local lock-in problem. And I think that's what really catalyzed me to go into Box. Although looking at here, I need to do some house cleaning. Um, yeah, I got stuff. And this is another thing we have to take into consideration when we think about cloud storage services, especially if you sign up for free accounts. It's easy to create this breadcrumb trail behind you of services. You sign up for Box, for example, you go in and you use it for a while. It's like, this is fine, but it doesn't give me all the things that I want. I'm going to start using Dropbox. I'm going to start using OneDrive. Well, are you making a conscious effort to go back to that previous provider and clear everything out and delete
Correct.
the application and, delete the user account, as is obviously demonstrated by what I just did? No, a lot of times it just kind of sits there and collects digital dust, but it's also your information that's floating out there. And for these companies, they have massive storage requirements that in many cases are content that hasn't been touched in years. So you have to think about, as you're evaluating content or cross-platform level storage cloud solutions or cloud storage solutions, each step that you take forward, you have to kind of sweep away the step behind you, unless you're planning to keep all the different services. All right. So you said you are a Dropbox guy. So educate me on Dropbox, because again, my knowledge on that's a little bit on the old side.
You know, Dropbox has improved significantly, and they're, as I was preparing for the show, I was thinking, okay, why haven't you leave Dropbox? And the reason is because it's one of those, don't break it, don't try to fix it. Okay. I'm not a big fan of Google Drive. Okay. And probably I live on an iOS ecosystem. So OneDrive, the Microsoft solution, is not going to be in the top of my choices. So, but why I haven't moved from Dropbox? Because it works well. It shares the document well, allows me to do what I need to do. Storage, the backup is reasonable enough, and I have a tons of space. Do I have a really good reason not to leave? No, it's working. Has worked for many years. I have never had an issue with them, so I have never looked into replace them. Sadly, again, as I'm preparing to the show, I say, well, what about the others? Why you haven't moved? Are they better or worse? And I use OneDrive and I use Google Drive regularly because of the clients. Will I move to those? I don't know. I don't think so.
Now, I don't know if this is the case for Box. It didn't look like it was. But Dropbox, and have an account there, so I went ahead and signed into it. And again, I have a large amount of digital dust collected on these files. But I noticed within Dropbox, they are leveraging the fact that they are a cloud-based provider to provide other services. So, for example, not only Dropbox for storage, they have a service called Transfer for large file transfer between individuals. They have one called Paper, which is to do draft ideas and collaborative docs, which is basically their word processor, if I recall correctly. But they also have a password storage capability where you can do like a LastPass type of idea and digital signatures and sending documents securely. It looks like they're trying to take advantage of the infrastructure that they've created for document storage.
And they do, and so far the applications are reasonable. So I have used Paper, I have used some of them, and again, it's convenient. Is one of the things sometimes you see, especially when you deal with clients, is the level of trust that the client have on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
When you said I'm going to put the file in SharePoint, okay, and they don't know what it is, okay, they are hesitant. You're putting the files, our company documentation there. Dropbox and Google Drive are two that most clients are comfortable with. On their knowledge, good or bad, okay, they understand that the file there, it's reasonably secure. And that is an advantage. That the sharing possibilities. I can go to Dropbox and create a link basically for each file if I want to. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
or I can share folders, or I can do so. That ability for me to share a document that I have in there in a link or some on a better way, it is really in really practical for what I do.
And file sharing is one of the touted features of every one of these large players. There's other third-party solutions out there that allow you to do direct file sharing that don't provide centralized storage of your
Right.
files, but I think one was called Big File, and there's a
Yeah,
bunch of
WeTransfer is one of
yeah,
those.
WeTransfer. That's one of the ones that I've used in the past. Uh, that's a common need. It happens. I mean, you get a big presentation or you have a video file or something like that. You're not sending that by email or anything else. But something like cloud storage, if you can push that file up there, then somebody else, you can share that. The difference being is those direct transfer type of solutions are usually one-offs. I'm going to send you this file. That's it. The cloud storage sharing creates a common point of contact where either party or multiple parties can go put files and take files out, crossing networks and crossing those connection capabilities. But again, we get back into that initial conversation. When you have a service that has a cap of 250 meg on a file, is that free service going to provide you the service level that you need? I would say, and this is across the board,
Mm-hmm.
cloud storage is something that you should consider paying for. If you're going to put any trust or confidence into a service for cloud storage, try it for free, use it for pay. And the reason is twofold. One, it means you're committed to it. It means you're going to continue using it, not just abandoning it like we've talked about things that I have. But the second part is that you're supporting that provider. Now, granted, some of these providers, Microsoft, Google, yeah, they don't need much more cash.
Right.
But it's a good habit to be in. And like I said, it is tied to that commitment piece that you are committed to using that particular service. The other thing is, in many cases, subscribing to those services will elevate the amount of storage you have available and the caps, and provide access to additional feature sets, which can really drive up the value of these. Now, looking at Dropbox and looking at my functionality, it's the same situation I had with Box. I can see that I signed up for this initially to be able to share files, but also a number of different applications were connecting into Dropbox to be able to use it as its synchronization point. So again, it looks like a nice application. I mean, it's got the UI, it looks a little dated, if I can be so blunt, but then again, so Box looks a little bit more modern than Dropbox's UI, but it's also very straightforward.
It is. Both they are. Probably the one that is the most different, it is Google. Google Drive, I will say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I would make the argument that I think OneDrive is a little further down the path. But again, this is where we're going to start creeping into these top two. This really becomes an interesting conversation in my book because OneDrive and Google Drive are both trying to be the center of the universe for their user base. I think Google Drive has the lead when it comes to personal file storage, and I don't think it has anything to do with documents. But OneDrive, when it comes to commercial and business file storage, I think it has the lead, and that's because it's leveraging Microsoft's footprint.
Correct.
But the reason why I think OneDrive or Google Drive has the advantage in the personal space is photos. It's all about photo storage. And I can say that from a personal anecdote. The only reason why I am paying for Google Drive storage at the level that I am is so I can store all of my photos in their original size and their original resolution. And that's something that people need to consider. If you are using a cloud-based storage system to store your photos, look and find out, is it compressing your photos or downscaling them to reduce the amount of storage space it takes? If it is, you're not going to have the same quality photo that you took.
Correct.
So that expensive iPhone or Samsung phone that you bought that takes 104 megapixel pictures and shoots 8K video, that's great, but you'll never be able to store it anyplace. And I would say that's probably the biggest con of cloud-based storage, is that we are generating massive amounts of content data, especially video now. And it's got to go somewhere.
You need to go somewhere, correct?
And the biggest thing that I run into is, great, I may be able to put it up in the cloud. Can I get it back down? And the factor that we have to consider when we talk about cross-platform is now we're not only talking about a cost of renting storage space in the cloud, we're talking a bandwidth cost of pushing files up and pulling them back. Because if you only have, let's say you only have a 25 meg upline connection on your internet, a big video file is going to take a long time to upload. It's going to chew up a lot of data. If you park a lot of video files up in the cloud and start to pull them back down to watch them, you're burning through your data. So this has to be a complicating factor in your consideration for cloud-based storage. Or do you even put some stuff in the cloud? I'm an advocate for hybrid. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think my answer is a hybrid answer, like yours. I don't. Yeah, I will say it's also a hybrid answer for me.
I mean, I've got literally terabytes of storage space in the cloud, and I have that because of all the assets that I generate. But I still would not put some of the biggest, or could not effectively put some of my largest files out in the cloud. I have external SSD drives and, as you heard, flash drives for storing some of those other assets, because it's impractical based on size to park them out in the cloud, because there's no real benefit to it living out there, those particular files. So when I think about things like, I'll use a personal example, like videos of my son's soccer matches. Well, posting those videos out there, the upside would be if I'm sharing those videos with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But if I've shared those out and everybody's watched them and like, oh yeah, that was neat. Do they need to live there? Do they need to sit out there and tie up that space? Or can I just delete those out of there and keep the local copies that I have here and protect those? It's a dilemma, because where are you going to put it locally? Are you going to put
Where
it
you're going to keep it that are not going to disappear?
Well, and I've been going through the exercise. I have stacks of DVDs and CDs that I have old pictures on. And when I say old, I'm talking like 2010, 2008. They're not
Mhm.
that old.
No.
But they're assets. They're assets that at some point that media will either deteriorate, or here's the worst part. Out of every device I look around me, only one of them has a CD reader.
Mm-hmm.
I only have one machine that I can then access that content on. That becomes an inherent problem. So, upside, cloud service, yeah, I should be able to access it from anything. Downside, it's perpetual payment. What happens if I stop paying? What happens to my stuff?
Well, it depends. Do you want to recover after you stop payment or not? That will be the first question to ask yourself.
And
But it's
that's
true. I mean, if you consider, movies or things like that, okay,
Mhm.
and you stop paying, well, you may lose them. That may be a problem.
Yeah, see, that's where when you consider your cross-platform productivity solution, you really have to take into consideration not only the short term, but the long term. What are you going to do with those note assets? And I'll use one of my favorite tools as the example. OneNote uses files. Doesn't use a cloud-based storage natively. It uses files that are stored in the cloud to provide synchronization. Well, you need those files. So if they're only living in the cloud, if you're only using the web version and you stop using it, where are all your assets? All those notes that you've spent so much time accumulating and curating are no longer available. Now, something like OneNote has a desktop application. You can synchronize it to your desktop and you can still access it, assuming you have a machine that can access those local files and that local application. So you have to take all of that into consideration. It's one of the reasons why PDFs are so popular, because
Well,
they're transportable.
and as you were saying that, you make me think another reason why I love Dropbox. And I have done this. Okay. I do coaching and I do work with companies. And when I'm working with certain companies, sometimes they send you their proverbial computer. Okay. Here is the computer we want you to work with. Okay. And on those cases, I tend to go and create a Dropbox. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, Augusto plus client at dropbox.com or at gmail.com, so I can create a Dropbox with that way, with their company email most times. Now I can create this small Dropbox that I can share files really easy without ever giving access to my main Dropbox account. And that is incredibly convenient for me.
And that, going back to the file sharing piece of it, that's really a deciding factor in many
Yeah.
cases, not only personally, but for families and more so professionally, to be able to have those assets in a place where they can be commonly accessed. It's one of the reasons why you look at, from a business standpoint, you look at services like Microsoft 365, you look at Google Workspaces. Being able to put assets in a common location and be able to pull and update those is really key. But we still go back to Again, the pros and the cons when it comes to close cloud storage play very close to each other. So, for example, the pro of it being backed up offsite onto cloud-based servers means that in a situation where you have, let's say, a natural disaster, and those seem to be happening fast and furious as of late. So you have flooding, you have a power outage, you have something like that. You know your materials are protected because they're living in the cloud. The con is that your access to that content may be limited until your connectivity is restored.
Correct.
So while you're gaining in one side, you're losing in the other. I may have access to my local files, but if I don't have power, I don't have access to them anyway. And they're at risk from physical loss if something catastrophic were to happen. These are all factors that have to come into play and think about. The personal thing that I've got, all my important documents, critical documents, mortgage documents, insurance, things like that. I have digital copies of all of those documents, and I have them on a weatherproof flash drive as images that are stored with the paper documents. If something catastrophic were to happen, and it's in a firebox, if something catastrophic were to happen, and the box were to be destroyed and the papers were to burn up, I would still have that flash drive that the odds are it would be okay. Would it make sense to park those also in the cloud? Yeah, if I wanted to really go in, double down on the protecting my information from loss. But what that does is that then flips me around to say, am I creating an easier channel of access to sensitive materials? So all of these have to be factored in to how we want to work these materials into our cross-platform solution. And now let's complicate it. Let's change tools.
Right.
Let's say I'm all about my Android devices, which I am, and I decide I'm going to live the Apple life. Well, I need to make sure I can still access all my files. I need to be able to access, do all those things. And as we talked about from the beginning of the show, if I was living the Apple life and put everything in iCloud, could I make the jump over to a Windows world? Could I make the jump over to a Chrome OS world? I probably could, but it would be hard. And those are things as part of your evaluation.
And there's more complications than that. And this year, I don't know, sometime between March 2020 and September 2021, that it seems for most people like me, a blob. Okay, during the blob, okay, what it was the Avengers, what it was the on the Avengers movie, I don't know if you when they disappear, half the world disappear, and
The
then
blip.
they come back. The blip. So on during our own real life blip, okay, I acquire a Chromebook. Okay, for reasons of work, I wanted to test the platform. I wanted to be able to, hey, when clients come and say, well, this is what I do, this is what I have, it it gets to be sorry, it's part of the fun of my work. Okay, I tend to buy devices to play, and I need to test them in the name of work. Hey, yes. But one of the things that happened to that device is that device, can I use that device to this full potential? And the answer is no. Because of the device, no. Because exactly that cross-platform element. Okay, I may be able with Dropbox to get all my files over there. I can get iCloud to the Chromebook, but now I cannot get some of the applications I use on my ecosystem to work in there. And sorry, I have too much invest on this ecosystem, so I need to quit the ecosystem in order to make the Android really productive. So that device, it was great for testing, but then end up in the shelf.
So here's where we wind up with this dilemma that I think many people find themselves in, myself included. When you have multiple services, you're using multiple providers for your cloud-based storage. And everyone has a compelling reason. Personally, Google Drive, it's easy for me to share things with other people because they have Gmail accounts. There's a natural, easy connection there. They get it. They're familiar with it. They've used it. Google Photos is there. Why? Because it connects automatically to the application that's on my phone and backs up the images. I don't have to think about it. They're there. OneDrive, well, that ties into all my Office 365 stuff and Microsoft 365 stuff, and that has a logical connection, and it has that personal vault, and there is compelling reasons to use all these. But now the dilemma becomes, what do I put where?
Well, or the other way around. I have a client who he is Android. Okay, his phone is Android. His side business lives in Android. Okay, but the other work, okay, their main job give him an iPad. Okay, and he called me. I need to start using this thing. I really asked for a Chromebook. They say no. I asked for a laptop. They say no. They said we are giving you this device. And the advantage he has is he lives in Google. So we set up, share the screen, remove anything that wasn't Google. And now he's using on the Apple ecosystem all his Google environment. He's just enjoying the hardware. That works really well on that case. But it's not always work on the people who move to Android to another one or vice versa. Not always work. It's in this particular case, it worked really well. But it's not easy. Even if you can get some of the things or access to some of the things.
No, it is very, it's not only complicated, but it can be very frustrating. And this is where I've seen services come out. I can't think of one off the top of my head, the name of it, but I've seen services that actually will provide you an interface that connects to multiple cloud providers and allows you to do a search across multiple providers. That's a neat feature, but it's also indicative of this core problem of having these multiple services and these multiple providers with literally terabytes of storage or gigabytes of storage, and you can't find what you're looking for. Now, and I'm sorry, people, I hate to keep complicating this even more. Now take your favorite tool, whether it's OneNote, whether it's Evernote, whether it's Notion, whether it's
Good notes.
Almost all of those allow you to store files in them and link to files. So which do you do? Do you put files in your application? Do you put your file in the same drive system and then link to it, having that extra step? You've got to make that decision around that process. And this is a complex piece. It's the reason why I said this is one of the big four, because this can have one of the greatest impacts on your cross-platform productivity of all of them. Because at the end of the day, all of this stuff has to go someplace.
Correct.
Speaking of end of the day, it's one of those last things that we should consider. At some point, every one of us will not be around to curate our content any longer. We will not be there to take care of our files. So the question becomes, if you're going to park all this stuff in cloud storage, can your next of kin, coworkers, whoever, who need access to the content, can they get access to it? Shared files, shared folders, that's fine. And the sharing works great. But there will, odds are, probably be something that's not shared that they'll need access to. You have to take that into consideration. It's not like going and grabbing that floppy disk and just sticking it in a computer and seeing what's on it. Its security was designed by its physical limitations. Now we've got something where we've got to be able to say, okay, I put all of the insurance paperwork in the cloud and somebody needs access to that insurance paperwork. Well, I've got to be able to make sure that they can get to it if I can't help them get to it. Again, one of those factors we have to take into consideration. So is cloud storage a good thing or a bad thing, Augusto?
I believe it's a good thing. Even I remember when I co-wrote iPad only book with Michael Slewinski, we had this discussion and we covered it lengthily on the book, and it still applies. It has modernized given, but it still applies. The reality is, for the average user, their files are way more secure in a cloud-based environment than their own device.
Yeah.
Think about it. Microsoft is moving to now be passwordless. Okay. And it's not for any other reason that they have tried for years to increase the security, and the users are still trying to use password 123. And when in 30 days the IT tell them to replace them, now it's 123 password.
Yeah, and that's on our one of our future episodes to record will be about security and biometrics, and I can't wait to talk about the whole premise of a passwordless world, because as people, we are so good at working with passwords, all sarcasm included, that having a system that's passwordless sounds enticing. I
don't know. I
better
agree
see
with
a
you.
heck of an implementation. Two-factor authentication was supposed to be part of that, and I have found it is more painful than it is helpful at times, even though it is secure.
It is secure, but the problem is the implementation of it is painful because most people don't want to implement it.
Right. And we'll go back to that piece I mentioned earlier about providing access. If, let's say, for example, something happens and my spouse needs to access files, and I've enabled two-factor security on my cloud storage, she needs my device to be able to authenticate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I can just give her a list of the passwords somewhere and she can use that. She still needs the device.
Right.
If that device is not available, if whatever reason I'm not able to do it for her has caused that device to also not be available, now there's a significant problem.
That's correct.
And it's one of those things that even at the most basic, I mean, I encountered with my father-in-law a situation where getting access to an account required an access code be sent to his phone. Well, his phone was disconnected and taken care of as part of the process. It was like 4 months after he had passed away. Like, well, we can't get a text there. Well, if you can't follow those steps in that process,
now it's
oh my goodness. So yeah. we'll leave that.
Actually, it's really, really interesting. You bring that point, and because that is a problem that the phone is one of the first things that you think about deactivating on those cases, and it's probably be one of the last ones because it's not that expensive. It's okay to keep it, but it's also the phone number for security and checks of everything.
Yeah, and that's something that most people don't take into consideration. It's one of the things when we start to look at things, and again, we'll dig into this in the security show when you talk about two-factor authentication, keys, YubiKeys, things like that. That goes a long way. That provides the security, but also provides that convenience level. But again, this is all something we have to consider even down at this platform level. If I put a file out in the cloud, can I get it back? Is it safe? And can I give it to somebody else if I need to? Those are the three starting questions. Everything else builds on those.
Yeah.
So I know we didn't clarify this for anybody. We didn't give them the answer to cloud storage. But I hope we help people think about what are the concerns and what are the things to take into consideration as they're making decisions, or at least trying services out.
And one of the great things is the conversation don't need to end here. As we said, you can always come interact with us in PersonalProductivity.club, and hey, let's bring this discussion to the next level. Come your questions or your comments or your knowledge, and participate with us. So
I would love to hear some suggestions of some other cloud storage providers, because I know I struggled when putting together my list. A lot of the services that I was familiar with either aren't there anymore, which is, again, another consideration. What do you do when your service provider disappears? But but I'd love to hear some other ones and some other services that are out there and things that are going, because that helps us understand where things are and
Yeah,
what people are
and
looking
help
for.
others.
Absolutely.
So follow us where you like to listen podcast, like us or subscribe to us, and leave us a review. You can also interact with us on PersonalProductivity.club. We are Augusto Pinaud and Art Gelwicks, and see you next time from your favorite